Hey guys, you're watching and listening to Freelance Answers. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're going to notice immediately that I'm not in my office. If you're listening on iTunes, you can probably tell based on the audio quality. I'm actually sitting at the Tesla Supercharger in Savannah, Georgia. I'm driving down to Florida with my wife and kids to go visit my family, so I'm taking the show on the road with me. But I wanted to answer one of the questions that we got in, and that was from Brian Mcfarlane. And again, I usually look at my phone to look at the question itself, so I'm going to need to go based off memory. But what Brian wanted to ask was, what if he has a client who wants to pay him based on performance? Let's say that Brian adds so many sales a month to his business. What are my thoughts on that? How should that work? Especially in cases where the client doesn't want to pay anything up front. So full disclaimer, I'm not a big fan of that. And here's why. One of the worst experiences in my business, one of the biggest kind of like setbacks that I ever had was, at the time I think I had about 8 employees, and 4 of them were working on one project. And this is a project that we'd been working on for a while now. It was a few months in, the client was paying on time. They were paying a lot considering they booked half of our team. And I'm going to turn on the air. There might be a little background noise, but I'm sweating in here. So they were paying us a lot of money, and we were billing every 2 weeks. So we had about 2 invoices out, usually at any given time, because our payment terms were net 30 at the time. So the client had 30 days to pay, or to pay the invoice. And as I mentioned, we were a few months into the project, everything seemed fine. And then I realized that I walked into my office one morning and looked at my invoice report, which showed any invoices that we had out, and the client had just crossed the 31-day mark on one of their invoices. And at the time, we had another invoice out too. So I got on the phone with him and asked him what the deal was. And here's how that conversation kind of went. He said, "Brennan, I'm starting this startup. I'm an entrepreneur. I've got my house on the line, and the fact of the matter is we ran out of money. But don't worry, we're courting investors right now. I'm actively fundraising, and I should be able to pay you soon." And the magnitude of the invoices combined was about $100,000. So this was $100,000 that I knew deep down we probably weren't ever going to see. I mean, he had already raised some money, and I doubted his ability to raise more. So I was in this pickle where I had all this money on the line, that I budgeted for, and now it just wasn't going to come in. So, long story short, I never got the money. This is what really precipitated my moving over to weekly billing and getting paid up front, because I never wanted to be in this situation again. I never wanted to be a debt collector where I had to frantically call my lawyer and ask him, what do I do? Moving to getting paid up front eliminated all of these issues. What that led me to kind of discover was that the idea of deferred payment, whether it be performance-based or equity-based payment or something like that, it really requires a lot of faith, for lack of a better way of putting it. And here's what I mean by that. Here's an example that I like to use. Let's say that you're in the business of building brick oven pizzas, or pizza ovens rather. You build brick oven pizza ovens and you sell it to pizzerias. Well, you could say you have the best oven on the planet. It makes delicious pizzas, and every pizzeria on the planet wants what you have, your oven in their own restaurant. The issue is, let's say a pizzeria starts up and they buy your oven, but they also buy really bad ingredients. They don't know how to cook. They have roaches, running around the dining room. There's all these issues that are kind of auxiliary, I guess. They're not a part of the oven. They're not the fault of the oven, but they could keep the business from succeeding. And the same is often true of our work, right? Like we could build a something great. We could design a great website. We could write a great whatever. And the fact of the matter is, that doesn't actually, if the product is bad, if the underlying product or service is bad, or the client just has no idea how to run a business or whatever else, that could end up causing what we did for the client to not yield much fruit. And whenever you're dealing with this kind of more performance-based model, that risk is always going to be there. So my philosophy when it comes to pricing is that there's an exchange of value happening. I'm giving a product that is worth X and the client's paying me Y in exchange. And when that equation is blurred by something deferred or whatever else, it really muddles things up. I think it devalues us. It devalues our worth. So my stock response nowadays, and this is what I would recommend to Brian or really anyone listening who's been in this situation or might be in this situation, is there exist people and companies that jump onto this risk, that jump onto this uncertainty, and they're called investors. And it's an investor's job to really look holistically at a company and basically figure out risk reward. Like, what's the risk that this will fail, and what's the reward if it succeeds, and how likely am I to see a return on my money? That's what investors do, right? So that should be the job of an investor who can then fund the business, who can then pay you or pay us. And I don't think it's smart for a lot of us to get involved in doing that. And you see this a lot, especially with upstart new companies who want to offer equity or something like that. And to be honest, I turned down equity for a company many years ago when I first started consulting, and they were recently acquired for a lot of money, and I would have probably done fairly well had I accepted their offer. But I could kick myself for not playing the right lottery cards or lottery numbers or whatever, right? Like, hindsight is always 20/20. I can't kick myself in the butt for that. But I think it's easy for me to think, oh, I should have, if only I would have done that. But I think the pragmatic thing for most of us to do is to look at our relationship with our clients as a mutual exchange of value. And value is priced. Value has worth attached to it, and it's immediate worth. And if they don't have the budget on hand to afford us, well, they should look at finding an investor, whether it be friends and family, an angel investor, or something a little more, venture based. It's not. I don't think it's something that most of us should be in the business of getting involved in. It involves lawyers, it involves oftentimes staying kind of on top of their financials perennially, especially if it's kind of an indefinite. You get a percentage of any future sales, kind of like a royalty in a way. So I don't know. I'm just not a fan of this more deferred model, and I'm not a fan on really any of these. Like the gift economy, I think, is an idea where the client will pay you about based on what they think the project you did for them is worth, and that's fine if you're selling, let's say, an ebook or something where there's no time overhead involved in distributing the product. But your time you never get back. It's a limited. It's like a fossil fuel, right? It's a non-renewable resource. So I'm not a fan of the idea that you have this arbitrary, just pay me whatever. I know we like it because it doesn't make us need to confront anybody, and it's really low risk. And yes, we'll get the project, and of course, with the project, the client doesn't need to pay anything potentially. But I think it's important, and I would recommend really digging through my stuff if you haven't yet to really figure out how to express this equation, how to express here's what I'm giving you and it's worth X, it'll cost Y to get it. I wouldn't recommend trivializing that. I wouldn't recommend devaluing yourself, your product, what you do, and so on. I'd stay strictly professional and say, look, I'm providing a service to you. That service costs this much money. And these are the terms of getting it, because I've just heard and I've experienced firsthand a lot of horror stories around when those lines are kind of blurred. So Brian, I hope that helps, and we'll be back next time for another Freelance Answers.